Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our ninth Global Public Seminar in Comparative and International Education. These seminars are jointly organized by the Department of Education and St. Edmund Hall at the University of Oxford. My name is Lynn Schneider, and I convene these seminars together with Maya Changseliani, Aliyah Khalid, and Liam Giron. Before introducing our speaker, let me attend to a few administrative points. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online in due course. We only record the first half of the webinar, so the presentation itself. We won't be recording the Q&A. Please keep yourself muted throughout the webinar unless you have been asked to speak or to ask a question. To ask a question, use the chat function and write out the question you wish to ask. At the end of the presentation, if your question is selected, you will be invited to ask it yourself directly. When invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video, and state your name and where you're from. We have 3 more seminars advertised, and in the next few moments, I will share a link in the chat to the webpage where you can learn about the topics of the forthcoming seminars and book your space. I will also share a link to the YouTube page where you can watch our past webinars. So now I would like to introduce to you our speaker. Thomas Samuel is at present a consultant for terrorist prevention with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Prior to that, he was with the Southeast Asia Regional Center for Counterterrorism for approximately 15 years. He started off as a volunteer health officer for World Vision East Timor in 2003. His main areas of research include countering violent extremism, developing early warning, early response mechanisms, developing radicalization indicators, strategic communications, and youth radicalization. Thomas is also very interested in mediation, conflict resolution, and spoiler management during times of conflict. He is currently pursuing his PhD, and his research is focused on the violent radicalization pathways of Malaysians. The title of Thomas's talk today is At the Crossroads, Rethinking the Role of Education in Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism. So I will now pass over to Thomas. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lin. Thank you very much, Prof. Maya, for this opportunity to share a little bit about the research that we have been doing with regards to CT. Are you able to see my PowerPoint slide?
Yes, Thomas.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm just going to very briefly look at some of the challenges that we have when we look at the role of education, particularly in preventing and countering violent extremism. I do a lot of work with young people, mostly in universities. We do a lot of engagement programs, and I'd just like to share a little bit of our experiences when it comes to this area. So I'm going to start off by saying that education is a target for violent extremists. And we know that very, very often. No, it's not just the building, the physical infrastructure itself, but oftentimes lecturers, oftentimes students, they are physically attacked. But also to consider that it's a target for violent extremists in the sense that they want to indoctrinate. And so you have numerous occasions in my part of the world, Southeast Asia, where violent extremists specifically go and look for young people. And the best places they go and look for them in my part of the world is in universities. So they are a target for violent extremists in the sense that a physical target, as well as at the mental level, at the cognitive level, they are targeted. And so this is relatively well documented, but what I'm trying to explore is, can education be seen as be used as a tool against violent extremism? So the thing that I'm trying to look at is the primary line of defense in PCVE among the youth. I'm trying to suggest that education can play an important role. There are challenges, but let's go through it one by one. But before I go into that, let me just share with you how radicalization happens in my part of the world. And this is because they have a very, very powerful narrative. And it's regardless whether they are nationalistic based, they're religious based, and regardless what kind of religion are they, whether it's a New People's Army, which is very Marxist based in Philippines, or Jamaah Islamiyah, which is based in Indonesia, or Kumpulan Militan Mujahideen, which is based in Malaysia. Regardless of the organization, of the terrorist organization, they tend to say the same things. And I just want to quickly look at that to see what we're being confronted with, what young people are being confronted with. And so the first thing that this violent extremists say is that violence is the only way. Again and again and again, they reaffirm the same thing, that look, guys, there's no other way but violence if we want to achieve our objectives. And this thing is reiterated again and again in the hearts of young people. And so when I see young people, they regurgitate the same thing. They say things like, Thomas, we don't have a choice. Violence is the only way. And when I ask them, look, how do you know this? Or who tells you this? And most of the time, they refer me back to the propaganda or rhetoric of violent extremists. So how do they do this? They do this by putting forth three premises. Number one, they suggest that there are injustices occurring all around the world. And what they do at this stage is they will show you evidence. The evidence would be pictures, images, videos. And they're saying, look, don't just believe us. See this, see what happens in your news. You see what's happening in this part of the world, in that part of the world. There are injustices occurring all around the world. And this works. Then they move to the second premise, which is we need to act. How can you sit there and do nothing while your brothers and sisters are dying in this part of the world? Babies are being killed here, women are being raped, and they sometimes even use standard lines. Then they go to the third premise, which is violence is the only response. Now, it's strange because premise number one, the reality of the matter is there are injustices occurring all around the world. And premise number two, we need to act. And by the way, when they go into premise number two, this is when they bring in religious texts, for example. They quote the Bible, they quote the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita. If at all, it's a Marxist-based organization. They quote philosophers, they quote great thinkers. The idea is, look, it's not us, just us telling you. All these great people, our holy prophets, our scriptures also tell us that we need to act. So premise number one, premise number two, in reality, it's the truth. There are injustices occurring all around the world. And you know, as human beings, we need to act. And then they capitalize on the lie, which is violence is the only response. And they make it seem that, look, if you want to do anything, the only option available is that of violence. The second myth they keep on telling is we are doing it for the people. And oftentimes young people, they say this, look, I mean, this terrorist group, these terrorist leaders, they are the only ones who are actually fighting for the people. And so what we do with these young people is we ask them, do they actually represent the people? Who elected them? I remember this one angry young man asking me, I don't believe in the government that you are talking about because I didn't elect them. And I asked him, who then do you believe in? He said, I believe in Osama. Did you elect him? And so many of them sometimes are manipulated, And so what we do is we ask them questions like, look, when you talk about this terrorist leader, he's doing it for the people. What mandate does he have? Why don't they use non-violent ways? Is their method acceptable? The third thing that we hear over and over again is we have no choice. This is young people saying that terrorists are saying, look, they don't have a choice. Thomas, you need to understand these guys, you have put them in a corner. They have no choice but to kill. They don't intend or want to kill innocent civilians, but they don't have a choice. Aaron Beck, he puts it very well, binary thinking, black or white, 1-0. Our cause is sacred, theirs is evil. And so many times when I talk to young people again and again, I hear this, we are righteous, they are wicked. We are innocent, they are guilty. We are the victims, they are the victimizers. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is in that context that we basically, in my part of the way, we confront. So what can educational institutes do? They can identify cognitive and emotional spheres. You can identify, look, what are the mental ideas being put forth? Is it a rational idea that is being put forth? What are the emotional conduits that they tap? Oftentimes they put, like I mentioned earlier, they put in images of people suffering. Then we can target and teach specific qualities. Now, it seems strange, and many times education, we don't want to touch into qualities because we don't want to touch into values. But the reality is this, and I'll go about it in a little bit's time. We have no choice but to teach about qualities. Number three, we need to seek outside assistance in reinforcing PCVE, meaning preventing, countering violent extremism content to students. We cannot just rely on teachers or lecturers. Number four, develop a syllabus on PCVE. Number five, train specialized teachers. Number six, develop and build networks of specialized expertise and develop monitoring and evaluation mechanism. Now, I hope we can go through this one by one. So we need to integrate PCVE in the school university curriculum. It cannot be a subject by itself. It can't. It always fails miserably. Students are very uptight when it's a subject by itself. And, the load that students have to carry is tremendous. So what we can do is weave it into the current syllabus. So the goal should be to protect the student from violent extremism while in an institution of learning. Yeah, that we know. But perhaps to go even further, to impart and equip students with all that is necessary to prevent them from ever considering violent extremism in the future. Meaning to say, the goal here is to put mental firewalls in the minds of the young people, that even 5 years after they leave university, after they leave school, and they are exposed to violent rhetoric, violent extremist rhetoric, they can stop to think, hey, wait a minute, I heard this argument before that violence is the only way, but I also heard the counter arguments. And I am suggesting that counter arguments, the best place to present, to debate, to discuss that counter arguments would be in schools and universities. Now, how do we do them? Academic subjects, for example, history, ethics, moral education, philosophy, and religious studies. The reality is this: these subjects are already being exploited. So while in many instances people are debating, look, should we put in values when we talk about history? The reality is the other side, they are putting all kinds of stuff in history, in moral education, in philosophy. We need to perhaps look at it in a rational way and present our case that, look, history does show, the reality is, empirically speaking, history does show that groups that use violence very, very seldom achieve their political objective. You're looking at an 80% over failure rate. Now, that is not a value-based judgment. That's a case study, historical-based judgment. Another way is to look at biographies of noted individuals as well as organizations. This really works. I can't tell you the amount of times I've gone to countries in which you have a group of young people who are angry. And many of them, I must stress this, many of them have actually noble intentions, Thomas, you don't understand what's going on in Syria. You don't understand what's going on in this world and this part of the world, that part of the world. And, the only thing that we can look up to is people like Velipalai Prabhakaran, who was leading the Liberation Tamil Tigers of Elam, or Nasir Abbas, who was one of the leaders of Jamaah Islamiyah. And for them, right, the only people who have made a difference are the violent extremists. This has to change, is what we are suggesting. So put in people like Nadia Murad. Let them study Malala Yousafzai. Let them study Gandhi. Now, at times, they need to be international figures like Gandhi, but it also needs to be contemporary figures that these young people can identify with. Sports, very, very powerful. In many, I'm in a particular country. Let me be honest. I'm in Maldives at the moment, and we are looking at violent extremism here. At one point, Maldives had the highest per capita of people going to Syria, and one of them was actually telling me, do you know that sometimes during Christmas, the people will take their boats and go out simply because they do not even want to be on the same land where some people might be enjoying some revelry. The first thing here is to go and separate the people. And I see this very clearly in so many countries. But the beauty is this: people who can't talk to each other, who won't even meet each other, when you talk about football, oh gosh, you're an MU fan, you're a Liverpool fan, it brings them together. Extracurricular activities within uniform bodies, clubs, and societies. Volunteerism, very powerful. Let them know that they can actually do something. So many of these young people are doing stuff like this, joining violent extremism, because they seem to be confronted with the idea that if they want to help, the only option available for them is to join violent extremism. So we talk to them about volunteerism, student exchange programs. For example, on a yearly basis, we have maybe 20 to 30 students who go to different parts of the world, sometimes conflict areas, and try to assist. Promote better understanding and appreciation of differing cultures, practices, and religions. We take this that this is normal. It is not. Many of them are in a certain echo chamber and they only hear certain kinds of narrative. We need to break them. And the thing is this, it's extremely difficult to break it in homes. And one way where they are possibly exposed is schools, and we can use schools to do that. The role of the teacher is so important. No, we need to move away from the banking model of education. Banking model of education is basically, look, you go to school and you withdraw from the teacher's knowledge base. That means it's a one-way instruction. The teacher starts to deposit knowledge into you. That is useful, but it needs to change, because today when you reach out to young people, that's not going to move. That's not going to work. We need to move to a student-centered approach. So the idea here, it's not transfer of knowledge, but rather the transmission of values. I mean, at what stage is it all right to go and bomb a kindergarten? These are questions that we oftentimes discuss And regardless how you look at it, there needs to be a transmission of values here. So the teacher is not playing the role of a teacher per se, but more of a mentor, more of a guide. We need to look at external support. The teachers themselves, they can't do it. And also, you have a lot of potential in looking at outside sources, for example, rehabilitated extremists. So what we do is we take extremists or violent extremists, terrorists who have been rehabilitated, and we bring them with us to universities, to schools. When they speak, the young people listen. They sort of have the street credibility. Good, look, I've been there, done that, and it doesn't work. And, I see the reactions in the faces of the people. I do wish I had longer time. I could show you videos of how they answer the survey questions pre-intervention. This is how they think, and then we do the intervention, and post-intervention, we see the fantastic changes that happen just from a 2-hour intervention. We need to look at victims of terrorism, because the reality is this: many of the young people are joining violent extremist organizations simply because they think they are helping the victims. And so when they're confronted with a victim actually speaking, I remember we went to this program in which Max Boone, who was a survivor of the attacks in Indonesia, he's a Dutchman who lost both his legs. When he speaks, gosh, there you can actually visibly see the young people change their opinions. This lady here is Christiane Boudreau. It's a very powerful video of her done by extremelives.org. Please do catch it if you can, in which she relates her experience about losing her son to Daesh. Extremely powerful. Now, she's a Canadian lady who lost her son to Daesh. And always we want to have context, meaning that if you go to a certain country, you want it to be their own citizens. But the reality is many times I don't have the option of having, of actually looking at localization or contextualization. I use many of their videos, but it still works. When I show mothers this lady, they may have nothing in common. They are different nationalities, different culture, different religion. But just hearing victims of terrorism speak is extremely powerful. Influencers, celebrities, youth heroes. Here I need to stress, many times that people tend to think that research, I'm a researcher in PCV, so I should be the best person to do this. No, I'm not. Simply because I might have the content, I might have the knowledge, but I do not have the pedagogy. I do not know how to convey this to people. And the basic question is this: who would young people listen to? We need to get them on board. So, this guy is a political satirist. He's a young chap, and in Malaysia. I had a chat with him about Nadia Murad. He did not know who Nadia Murad was. And he actually did a video and he won a Google Award. It went viral and it is so powerful. But his skill was not so much in the area of countering violent extremism. His skill was he was able to understand his audience and to present it in the form of a video which they understood. So we need to seek help and get these people involved in schools. So it's not just the sole responsibility of the teacher, but as I said, whether it's former terrorists, whether it's survivors of terrorism, or in this case, influencers, celebrities, youth heroes. The rule of the thumb is this: whose picture is in the phone of the young person? That's the person that the young person will listen to. And I can assure you it's not going to be a picture of their senior assistant principal or a picture of me, a researcher in PV. It is going to be influencers, celebrities, youth heroes. Get them to help us convey the message. So we need to arm the students in what? Critical thinking. We have to do that. So, many times when I speak to recruiters of terrorism, they tell me the same thing. The first thing that we look for, Thomas, is we look for people who do not think critically. And for them, right, their kryptonite, meaning violent extremists, their kryptonite is a student who thinks critically. Why? Because one guy was relating to me, Thomas, if we get a student who thinks critically, or a young person who thinks critically, or any individual who thinks critically, not only can we not recruit him, when he starts to ask that questions, the others start thinking, and that's the end. We lost the crowd. We need to teach empathy. And this is we must be careful about teaching empathy, because if we don't teach empathy correctly, it will be just empathy for their kind of people. So I am an Indian Christian. So it'll be empathy for all those who are Indians and Christians alone. This empathy needs to cross culture, race, religion. We need to show the importance of diversity. Many of them seem to think that, look, diversity is a bad thing. And the reality is they've been shown very one-sided arguments of diversity. And when I ask them, look, why not consider other options of diversity? And they say, what other options? They don't know. We need to teach them resilience. The reality is this: all of us will go through hard times, even young people. And violent extremists know that, and not only do they know that, they particularly focus on people who are going through hard times, whether you have problems in your relationship, whether you have problems in not having a good job. And they focus on these people during their times of trouble, and that's when they indoctrinate them. Again and again, we see that. So the reality is we need to teach resilience to young people on the basis that, look, life's hard. And when things go south, you need to have resilience, so that if at all at that time, the so-called knight in shining armor comes to make things right, you can say that, look, I don't need to rely on your indoctrination. I have the resilience to go through this. Number 5, we need to show the failure of violence and the power of non-violence. When I do interventions with young people, we fail miserably in this. Again and again, young people tell me, Thomas, all you need is just to take a knife, take a gun, get into a truck, and we will do this acts, and we will get what we want. And we go through case studies. Well, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. You're talking about terrorist organizations who have been there for 30, 40 years. I mean, they have not met their KPI. Isn't that not clear enough on that? That clearly shows that there's a failure in violence. And then we talk to them about non-violence, whether it's strike, boycott, and probably they seem to misunderstand non-violence with non-action. And what we do is we educate them, say that, look, that's non-action, which is not what we're suggesting. We are suggesting action, but let it not be violent. And the best place for this discussion to happen, again, we can't force anything down the throats of young people. I have a 3-year-old daughter. If you tell her to do one thing, she does the opposite. All we can do is to present the alternatives. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the sad fact of the matter is this: many times they don't see any other alternative. It seems to be only one. Why? Because we haven't done our part. Now, what are the significant points to consider? The phenomenon of non-violent yet radical groups. These are groups which have radical ideas, but they're not violent. Is it a bad thing? Well, they've not done any acts of violence. For example, we have a group, you have it in many countries, called Hizb ut-Tahrir. Hizb ut-Tahrir in Malaysia talks about a supra-caliphate, which is southern Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and Philippines. And they say that, look, we just want everybody to come together and make this caliphate, not through violence. We want to do it through preaching, through da'wah. And many people say, so what's wrong with that? I mean, it's not an idea I like, but they're not preaching violence. The problem is, more and more we are finding out that violent extremists seem to come out from these non-violent yet radical groups. And many of these non-violent yet radical groups, they are not violent, not because they adopt Gandhi's principle of satyagraha. No, strategically, they have decided that at this moment in time, it's not to our advantage that we adopt violence. So here we have the safety valve or conveyor belt school of thought. The safety valve school of thought says that, look, let these guys say whatever they want to say. That's their way of releasing pressure. Let them do that. Or we have the conveyor belt. This, you go to an airport, you have the conveyor belt. People who start off from this oftentimes end up. And I am not suggesting in any way that we arrest all of them and put them in. We can't do that. We should not do that. But what I am suggesting is this: these guys have a radical idea, and there is a potential for this radical idea to become a radical, violent idea. So when they have that radical idea, what do? Do we say, oh, look, there's nothing we can do, it's not violent? So, or do we challenge them? Do we debate with them? Do we discuss with them? How do we teach our young people? I mean, do you have a special class where you have a countering violent extremism class for young people? That's not going to be possible. We can do it in schools. That's where we can discuss this. So when they have the discussion later on with non-violent yet radical groups, they are trained to ask questions. And so in journalism, right, you teach the journalists to ask certain questions. And that's all we're trying to do with our young people. We're not pushing any doctrine of non-violence or nothing. We're just saying, look, when you hear something, ask these questions. That's it. Ed Hussein, he said, there's certain worldviews, even when held without educating violence, provides the mood music that encourages terrorist acts. And that's a problem we have here. We can see the progression of the young people as they go through these not violent yet radical groups. Some of them move on. But we seem to be powerless. They say, look, they haven't done anything wrong. We can't do anything. We can't do anything. And I am suggesting we can do. Intellectually, we can engage them. And the place to do that, the place to learn how to do that is in the schools. You know, Abu Bakr Bashir, he gave the analogy of a man selling knives. And he said this because he's the alleged leader of Jamaat Islamiyah. He, of course, says he's not the leader of JR. He says, I'm an old man. You think I'm a terrorist? And you know, when they say, well, how about the so many students in your school, your pondok, who has actually gone into terrorism? And he said this, I'm a man selling knives. I'm not responsible for how those knives are used. You see, his skill was this. He used his school to put in very, very much violent extremist ideas. What we are hoping to do is to let young people, students know that, look, there are alternatives. Look, there are questions that we can ask. So what are the challenges with doing this? There's a lack of studies on the effectiveness of educational intervention in PCVE. We don't have good studies. Is it effective? I mean, we have done a lot of qualitative studies, but quantitative, you have a control. We have not done in my part of the world, we have not done much of that. There's inherent limitations of such interventions when addressing certain drivers of radicalization. So if the individual thinks that his religion or his belief mandates him to do it, very little education can do about it at that time. There's the possibility of the interventions alienating parts of the student population. We have to be very careful about this. You're targeting just a certain ethnicity, you're targeting certain religion, and we have to be careful about that. There's a possibility of teachers and teaching institutes not willing or sufficiently equipped, trained to take or handle such role. Number one is they don't want to take the role. Look, we are teachers. We teach maths, we teach geography, we teach history. We don't want all this value stuff. And there are some who have told me, look, we want to, but we are not equipped. And so it's very ununiform. Some chaps push a little bit, some chaps don't mention it. And so they're saying that, look, we don't even have the time now to actually be trained in the subjects we are supposed to teach, let alone this. Mandela said this, and no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. The idea here is, where's the best place to learn something? And I would like to put forth that it would be the school. Thank you very much. Dr. Lin, I'll pass it back over to you, please.